Hi gang, on the battlefields of the 41st millennium, few sights can marshal the resolve of the soldiery of the Imperium as that of the Adeptus Custodes, the most powerful warriors the Emperor could create. Clad in golden armour and bearing the ancient Guardian spear, the Custodes are one of the most effective fighting forces in the Imperium, and so rare as to be almost myths for all those who serve it. But the Custodians themselves care little for those who look up to them. In fact, it's questionable if they're even capable of caring at all. Their only interest is in the safety of the corpse strapped to the Golden Throne, and in the destruction of anything they perceive as a threat to it. The Adeptus Custodes are the immortal bodyguard of the Emperor of Mankind himself, the finest and earliest examples of his genetic genius, and sworn protectors of the Imperial Palace on Terra. Their shield hosts and Sodalities range the length and breadth of the Imperium, deploying from their own ancient golden craft or fighting alongside the Indomitus Crusade, ruthlessly eliminating anything that may one day become a threat to him on Earth, and forewarned by a network of informants and infiltrators few other Imperial organizations could compete with. When they deploy, they do so clad in ancient Auramite power armor, the finest in the Imperium, engraved with the symbols of the Emperor himself, armed with crackling, master-crafted Guardian spears, and conveyed into battle by ancient technology jealously guarded from the forges of Mars for 10,000 years. Each of them is a unique creation, towering over their mortal warriors, far faster, stronger, and more experienced than even the oldest of the firstborn Space Marines. Each an individual demigod, crafted through ancient science and standing almost 9 feet tall in their crested golden helms, a shining elite at the center of the fighting, carrying aloft the standard of the Emperor. The gene-forged men and women of the Custodes are, as they always have been, a symbol, the everlasting representation of the Emperor's personal authority, both a symbol of his might and his hand of judgment. Their reforging makes them completely incapable of deviating from that role, despite being some of the most learned scholars in the Imperium, and this has been the case unchanging for 10,000 years, from back when they walked at his side and guarded his body against the terrors of old night. The origins of the Adeptus Custodes are lost in the dark history of genetic engineering that started with the Age of Technology and reached its terrifying height in the Age of Strife. Since the early days of galactic expansion, mankind had made use of genetic engineering, modifying humanity to better withstand the void, or to thrive on particular worlds, or for war, splice-wrought and muscle-grafted warriors becoming common currency over the years. In some cases, the results of this persist into the 41st millennium, like the Ogrins of high-gravity planets, or the navigators that guide fleets through the warp. Others are considered grave heresy, like the unholy alloying of transgenic hybridization, the combining of xenos and human genomes. As the society of the Dark Age of Technology collapsed into the Age of Strife around the 25th millennium, humanity fell into isolation, and this experimentation continued unabated. Whole societies were subject to genetic pogroms, used as the raw materials for horrific new designs, or suffered under the yoke of ethnos, as various rulers attempted to hoard what remained of the ancient science for themselves. And it was into this arena that the Emperor emerged in the 29th millennium. An unparalleled scientist, one of the few beings who remembered the Age of Technology, the Emperor searched out lost laboratories and caches of ancient information, and with them he started his own experiments. It's unknown what experimental prototypes he created in the years before he emerged publicly, but from the very start of his Imperium, when the Emperor arose and his armies of unity slowly, forcibly reunited the planet, he was always accompanied by the Custodes. The Custodians were the pinnacle of his genetic graft, superlative warriors far superior to the monstrosities and crude techno-barbarian creations used by the warlords of Strife-era terror, and from the very beginning they served as his bodyguards and his heralds, accompanying him as he sought to wipe out the more extreme examples of genetic horror that existed on old Earth. Legends speak of his overthrowing of the excubari vivamorphs of Cathmarg, who culled the young for their beautiful flesh to graft onto their own failing bodies, or the nightmare horrors of the Gormont clans of the deep sinks of Detramerica, whose terrible strength and longevity were bought only at the price of a far more indiscriminate and insatiable hunger. All were destined to fall under the spears of the Emperor and his Custodes. At the start of the Unification Wars, their numbers were very, very few, maybe only dozens strong. Records of the taking of the Black Manse of Nansao early in the campaign list the Emperor as being accompanied by only 4 Guardians clad in crimson and gold, unpowered plate armour in those days. But as Unification progressed and the Emperor recovered more ancient technology from his conquered enemies, their numbers grew. Never quickly, the Emperor created other, simpler gene-altered warriors like the Legio Custodes or Thunder Warriors to serve as his primary armies, but slowly the Custodes' numbers increased. By the taking of the chaos-worshipping Molan Sen Confederacy, the Thunder Legions were led by the Emperor and 30 Custodians, clad in Auramite armour and wielding Guardian spears, and a few decades later, the final few Thunder Warriors, now a liability once unity had been achieved, were executed at the hands of hundreds of Custodians. By the time of the Great Crusade, the now Legio Custodes had grown to a powerful force, a bodyguard of peerless warriors known as the 10,000, charged with the Emperor's personal safety above all else. Led by their Captain General Constantin Valdor, often rumoured to be the very first of their number, a double-strength company of the Legio served as the Emperor's close protection at all times, and other bodies of warriors were spread across his personal fleet, guarding his quarters on his flagships and palaces, or delegated as his heralds and messengers, deployed across the various expeditionary fleets of the Crusade as symbols of his authority to keep watch over those who might displease him. Their official base was the Imperial Palace on Terra, the security of which was overseen from the Tower of Hegemon by the Custodes. It's important to note that from the very start, the Legio Custodes' duty was that of bodyguards, not soldiers. Their training emphasized individual action, and they were quite capable of running undercover missions, infiltrating suspicious organizations, or conducting security tests of the palace itself. These blood games often taking months, as individual Custodes would attempt to bypass their own defences to highlight weak points. As well as more conventional warfare, their operations frequently involved multiple layers of informants and hidden operatives, and utilised the most ancient and delicate surveillance technologies. When they did deploy to the battlefields of the Great Crusade, they were designed as the elite of the elite, capable of totally dominating any fight they found themselves in, armed in the most sophisticated and sublime power armour, wielding the very rarest master-crafted weaponry, and utilising examples of ancient Terran technology whose construction secrets had deliberately been held back from the Mechanicum of Mars. In these roles, they frequently deployed alongside the Sisters of Silence, the paramilitary force designed to hunt down and apprehend psychers. And the two organisations were designed from the start to complement each other, their fighting styles synchronising in battle. These two forces, both paramilitary in nature and commanded by the very highest levels of imperial authority, were known as the Talons of the Emperor. It was as the Talons that the Custodes and the Sisters were deployed to Prospero at the start of what would become the Horus Heresy, Constantin Valdor leading the Legio alongside Liman Russ and his Space Wolves against the 1,000 Sons of Magnus the Red. But in the wake of the destruction of Prospero, zero, and with the heresy in full swing, the 10,000 mostly retreated to Terra and its environs. With the calamitous destruction of his Webway project, the Emperor was bound to the Golden Throne, and for much of the war and later the siege of the Imperial Palace itself, the Legio Custodes was engaged in a desperate fighting withdrawal deep within the Imperial dungeon, attempting to stop hordes of demons from overrunning the palace from within. After the heresy, with the Emperor dying and only able to be kept alive by permanent internment on the Golden Throne, the Custodes became even more withdrawn and isolated. Renamed the Adeptus Custodes during Guilliman's reorganization of the Imperium, the Custodians confined themselves largely to operations within the Imperial Palace, bound by an edict of restraint formulated by Guilliman and Valdor that prevented them from leaving the solar system in great force, many shedding their ancient Auramite armor in mourning. The edict remained in place long after Valdor had disappeared, long after Guilliman had been placed in stasis, for 10,000 years, until the closing days of the 13th Black Crusade at the end of the 41st millennium, when it was finally repealed by the High Lords of Terra, the current Custodian General Trajan Valoris taking up a seat on the council and deploying the might of the 10,000 once again. In the post-Great Rift universe, with Guilliman returned and the Indomitus Crusade in full swing, the Adeptus Custodes have now become a frontline tool of defense for the Imperium. Their organisation still holds itself somewhat apart from the Imperium at large. They're the bodyguards of the Emperor himself, and answer to no other authority, not the guardians of the Imperium he created. Thankfully, those parameters give them considerable leeway to still act. Any threat to the Imperium that could potentially imperil the solar system or Terra could be considered a threat to the person of the Emperor, and so forces of the Adeptus Custodes now fight on war fronts across the galaxy, including on multiple battlefronts of the Indomitus Crusade. And while their true numbers aren't known, it's likely that their title of the 10,000 isn't just an idle saying. The creation of a custodian is just as long, detailed, and arduous a process as ever. The Custodes are created by forms of gene alchemy kept secret and hidden for 10,000 years, and the scale of undertaking is such that each custodian is a totally unique creation, moulded carefully down to the genetic level. The raw material for the Adeptus Custodes, like the Space Marines, is human children, but recruits to the Custodes are taken at a much younger age, given up as infants. Originally, these infants would have been taken from the defeated warlords of Terra, a surety and penance inflicted on those who had defied the Emperor by taking their sons and daughters and remaking them into his most loyal servants. Now, the infants are offered up willingly by Terra's noble houses, sometimes whole generations being donated to Imperial service in what is seen as an act of great devotion and honour. These recruits are then genetically rewritten from the ground up by some of the most vaunted gene artisans of Terra, whole bloodlines of geneticists and craftspeople dedicated to keeping alive the Emperor's arts. Not for them the crude gene seed and implanted organs of the Astartes. The Custodes are created using some of the most sophisticated genecraft preserved from previous millennia, without the external implantation of organs, in a process so taxing that only one in many thousands of recruits survive. These alchemical augmentations are carried out over decades on the most subtle level, worked upon their core genetics in a process that's deliberately kept very secret. The resulting warriors are the pinnacle of the Emperor's craft. Stronger, faster, more resilient, and more acute of senses than the Space Marines or even the Thunder Warriors that preceded them, and functionally immortal unless killed in battle, seeming never to age. Their minds are considerably reworked too, rewritten to become keener, sharper, and with more of an eye for detail, and any psychic potential completely erased, their psyches hardened against the warp. Candidates undergo thousands of hours of psychomimetic training that fills their minds not only with with combat skills, but also statecraft, philosophy, and history, for the custodians were always intended to be the emperor's confidants and companions, as well as his protectors, able to converse and offer counsel on any subject under the sun. The resulting custodian is a truly unique creation, a totally new being with no knowledge of their past life at all, with no records kept of their origins, which allows the nobles of the Terran court to claim, of course, that their offerings were definitely the successful ones. They take new names, often borrowed from historical rulers and heroes, and as they progress in their career, those names are added to, carved on the inside of their armor in a spiral, the eldest custodians having names many dozens of words long. These new warriors are presented with a misericordia, a ceremonial dagger that was once on ancient Terra the symbol of tyrannical rule, co-opted to represent the Emperor's judgment and the right of its bearer to act as the Emperor's sanctioned executioner. Upon completion, they immediately take their place in the ranks of the Order. Their training means that there are no juniors within the Custodes. Each is accorded immediate respect by their colleagues. They're peerless philosopher warriors, totally loyal, pathologically incapable of dishonouring or turning from the Emperor, and obsessively dedicated to their role as protectors and bodyguards. But despite all this precise training, the organisation of the Adeptus Custodes is surprisingly fluid. Each warrior of the Custodes is an individual, free to seek out their own missions or dedicate themselves to their preferred form of warfare. Custodians are all broadly equal in status and rank, the very lowest one of them holding authority higher than almost anyone else in the Imperium. And they function as a network of peers rather than following a rigid chain of command. Rather than being assigned to squads, custodians commonly form themselves into Sodalities of like-minded warriors who either follow the same obscure philosophies and arts of battle or arm themselves in the same way. And over time, these varying methods of warfare have evolved into a series of discrete castes within the organisation, common philosophies of war rather than official divisions. The Hikanatoi comprise the majority of Custodes Sodalities, their warriors the image of the Emperor's golden protectors, clad in the high helms and golden Auramite power armour of the Legio of old, and armed with the traditional weapons of the Order, the masterworked Guardian spears or Sentinel blades that incorporate ancient Terran bolt technology fused to artisan power weapons. The Thoranatoi are formed from the most martially minded of the Custodes and form a core of heavy shock troops. Their Sodalities are likely to take the field in some of the most advanced suits of Terminator armour the Imperium's capable of manufacturing, the Aquilon or Alarus patterns, or to arm themselves as Sagittarum with long-range Adrathic disintegrator weaponry, deploying to battle via teleport assault or from the holds of venerable land raiders. The Cataphractoi emphasise the roles of the Custodes as mobile protectors, able to react most swiftly to external threats, taking on the role of pilots of the Adeptus' ancient armoury of gravitac vehicles or orbital craft, or serving as Virtus Praetors from the backs of speeding Gear Falcon and Dawn Eagle jet bikes. The Moritoi, the smallest of these divisions, is formed of the Honoured Dead, the Custodes' reserve of ancient dreadnought suits. Custodes were some of the first Imperial warriors interned in dreadnoughts, their bodies uniquely suited to the stresses of confinement. Many of these suits are of the venerable and rare Contemptor pattern, sometimes armed with unique versions of the Custodes' customary weaponry, though other, much older patterns are also maintained. And finally, the Epheroi are those who have tasked themselves with covert operations and counter-surveillance, the eyes of the organisation, and often one of the last places a custodian will serve. It's the Epheroi that continue the tradition of blood games to test the organisation's defences and maintain good links with other Imperial organisations of high authority, such as the Officio Assassinorum. As they progress through their lives, a custodian might come to serve in many Sodalities, in many different divisions of the organisation, moving on as and when they wish. Despite their organisation as peers, certain accolades may still be awarded them. Those who serve 500 years may progress to the ranks of the Wardens, adopting ceremonial robes and often taking on the use of the Castellan axe as a mark of their steadfast and unbreakable service. Those of incredible martial skill may be elevated to the Heteron Guard, squads of the most superlative warriors in the Adeptus. Veterans might be gifted the honour of bearing the Emperor's sigil, as they often did in the ancient days, becoming Vexillus Praetors. But one of the greatest honours is to be selected for service in the Companions, the 300 Custodes stationed directly around the Golden Throne itself. Hand-selected for service, the warriors of the Companions stand vigil for incredible lengths of time, unmoving and constantly on the edge of battle readiness should anything occur. Their armour and sanity tested by long exposure to the brilliant light of the God Emperor. Though the length of service of each companion varies, the custodian Asteran Kalos is credited with standing watch the longest, enduring unmoving for a full century before being rotated out. When larger forces of Custodes are required, the Sodalities may pledge themselves to the service of a shield company, led by a shield captain. The shield captains are veteran warriors of the Custodes, exceptional fighters and battlefield commanders, who often hold a host of other honorifics and titles already. The rank of shield captain just denotes that they have the responsibility of leading their comrades in battle, though many of them are veterans of centuries of warfare or former companions. At even larger scales, these shield companies might be organised further into shield hosts, commanded by praetors, tribunes, or the captain general of the Adeptus himself. Shield companies and shield hosts are rarely permanent groupings, usually assembled for a particular mission or a campaign, though there are some famous shield hosts that have endured centuries without being disbanded, their members rotating in and out as their duties permit. For example, the Dread Host are a permanently crusading shield host, deployed from a trio of warships known as the Moirades and permanently in motion, committing themselves to some of the largest threats the Imperium's ever faced. Their forces spearheaded by Terminator-armoured Tyrannotoi. On the other hand, the Shadow Keepers shield host are one of the most secretive. They've been in existence for over 10 millennia, committed to guarding the dark cells deep beneath Terra, the holding pens of some of the last terrors of the Age of Strife. And the Solar Watch are a shield host composed of several shield companies that are permanently stationed in the outer reaches of the solar system, their members having sworn binding oaths to serve as the first line of defence against any invasion of the system. Throughout their lives, a custodian warrior might move through many of these informal organisations, but should they not die in battle, eventually even a warrior as advanced as a custodian might start to slow, start to feel that they aren't quite as fast or as quick-witted as they once were, however slight the change, or maybe lose faculties through injury on the battlefield. It's common for these custodians to resign themselves from active duty, to hang up their Auramite armour, and to become one of the eyes of the Emperor. Clad in shadowy cloaks and armed with the most advanced of stealth technology, the eyes of the Emperor are the Adeptus Custodes' early warning system. They take up hidden residence on Imperial worlds, watching for signs of corruption or recidivism, anything that might eventually grow to become a threat to the solar system and thus the Emperor himself. They set up hidden bases and holdouts, cultivate networks of informants and spies, and judge the many petty failures and treacheries of their chosen sector, watching for anything threatening enough that it might require the response of the Adeptus. It's because of the eyes of the Emperor that the Custodians can frequently be found far from Terra, launching preemptive strikes on worlds predicted to one day, maybe, become a threat. The Adeptus Custodes are one of the most elite, most technologically advanced, and most rarely seen of the Imperium's forces, even in the 41st millennium. To the common citizenry of the Imperium, even to august individuals like Inquisitors, they may as well be myth, so vanishingly rare that to see one is to be dumbstruck with awe. Yet, despite their vaunted status as the most elite protectors of mankind, the Custodes themselves treat much of the Imperium with little more than contempt. The Custodes' only duty is the protection of the Emperor himself, something they failed at once, and with that shame hanging over them, everything else can crumble as long as that duty is secured. The citizens of the Imperium and their entire government and structure are simply beneath their concern. turn, and even warriors such as the Space Marines of the Adeptus Astartes are barely tolerated. To the Custodes, the Space Marines were simply tools that were proven faulty the moment Horus turned. The Primarchs just weapons given too much power to start with, and who are held at arm's length even in the present day. They see the religion of the Imperium, its veneration of the God Emperor, as nothing but another symbol of its decline. To them, the Emperor is a king of kings, a peerless scientist and leader, and humanity's worship of him goes against everything he stood for. They tolerate the Space Marines, the Imperial cult, even Guilliman himself, merely as necessary bulwarks against a threat to his person, and they fight alongside the armies of the Imperium only when they consider it necessary to achieve their own ends. For many in the Custodes, their 10,000 years of isolation was necessary to spare them from the decline of the rest of the Imperium, for only they are truly loyal to the plans of the Emperor, and everything else, everyone else in the galaxy, should be treated with suspicion. In fact, though that paranoia might have grown over the millennia, part of it has been bred into every Custodes since the first. As we said before, their minds have been reshaped on a genetic level, focused towards only one purpose. For them, the thought of betrayal is an impossibility, which raises the question of just how much free will the Emperor left them behind those golden helmets. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like a few more quick intros to the factions of the 41st millennium, well, there should be a video popping up on the right. And if you'd like to support the channel, then you can like and subscribe. You can buy your toys from the affiliates in the link below. And also down there, you can find details of our Patreon and YouTube memberships, where you can get early access videos and access to the Discord. See ya!